come out here and speak to so many people. It looks like a lot of people have come from a long way, and I'm very grateful for you doing that in support of your own industry. I might get some photos later that show how many people actually turned up, or get them sent to CASA perhaps. So I'll just start off by saying that I'm of the view that CASA has crushed the general aviation industry. I think I might have said it at Senate estimates, but it seems to me as though their view is that if you can make the burden so high and the paperwork so heavy, we get to a point where no aircraft can take off, and therefore there will be no accidents. And that's almost the way in which they view certainly general aviation. I don't think they've listened to industry, and I don't even think they've listened to the Parliament, and that's hugely problematic. We need to basically get a broom and sweep through CASA, and I'll tell you in a short while how I think that can be done. So since 1995, when CASA was established, we have seen a decline in general aviation. There's no question about that. During the recent Senate inquiry, just some numbers that were brought up during those from the Bureau of Infrastructure and Transport Research Economics on flying hours show a massive decline, even from 2019 to 2020. Own use business down 24.3%. Instructional flying down 9.4%. Sports and pleasure flying down 25%, and other flying down by about 28%. Now, some of that may be attributed to COVID, to be fair, but this is the general direction that things have been heading for quite some time. And the major cause of this is a whole raft of legislation or regulation that is disproportionate to the safety risk. That's the major problem that we've got. And I've just written down some of the regulations that you guys will probably know better than what I do, but the Senate is certainly listening to what you have to say. So we've seen over-regulation in pilot licensing and category rating, so that's part 61. So that's basically overreach that is decimating the industry. We've also seen, in terms of maintenance licensing, duplicated and excessive regulations that have contributed to the downturn in the number of lamies that we see around the place. I probably don't have to say anything other than flight medical examinations, and just completely overzealous regulation in relation to that. We've got a situation where you go and get a doctor's certificate. I understand the cost is somewhere up around the $480 mark, and the doctor's certificate get overturned by a bureaucrat in Canberra who never talks to the pilot. And this is absurd, just absurd. Air transport rules for small aeroplanes, part 135, on looking at things like the numbers of limits on a number of seats. Training organisation requirements, part 141 and 142. Just killing off our training schools, and they are, of course, the breeding ground for the rest of aviation in Australia. So these are hugely problematic. We've seen safety regulations being issued by CASA without regard or without a safety case, without regard to the economic cost, or proper consideration of the risk. Basically, you guys are treated the same manner as RPT organisations. And that's wrong. That's simply disproportionate again. We've seen all of this happening in a period where the cost of aviation is rising. The cost of fuel, the cost of airport access, the cost of insurance. All of these costs are also basically creating a double whammy situation for you guys. And there are people in Canberra that do understand some of this, and I'll talk to you about why it's important perhaps to have someone like me unconstrained by party lines, who can really shout things out in Canberra. So we've had numerous reviews. So in 2013 we had an aviation safety regulation review that found things to be overly legalistic, difficult to understand, and too focused on punitive outcomes. We had a Deloitte's Access Economics study in 2018, basically calling out again problems with regulations. We've just, of course, had a Senate inquiry that's examined this. So we've had a number of inquiries. We actually know what the problems are. I can remember in my time here, and I know Don James is around somewhere, up the back there, where getting calls from FalconAir about transplant operations being suspended on the basis of very dubious pilot-related regulations or enforcement. We've seen Angel Flight, and where's Angel Flight? Down here. An absolute assault on Angel Flight. A hugely important service right around Australia, and particularly in the regions, by CASA. I remember when that regulation first came in, Shane Carmody came and had a bit of a chat with me, and within 24 hours of that he re-released the regulation, because in some instances it was just totally unsustainable what CASA were going to do. That's the first point at which, and Senator Susan John probably won't be mentioned to this, but that's the first time she crossed the floor in support of Angel Flight. And that can be problematic in some parties. That will hurt your pre-selection. Luckily she's a national, so not quite so hard over on that. Of course, after some of those events with FalconAir, with Angel Flight, the Parliament did react. We introduced in 2019 the Civil Aviation Amendment Bill that sought to take away solely the focus on safety, making sure that CASA would consider the economic and cost impacts on individuals, businesses and communities, and take into account differing risks associated with different industry sectors, such as general aviation. Now, the Parliament passed that bill. What I was just reading from there was from the explanatory memorandum that was presented to the Parliament. Now, since that bill has passed, CASA has done very little. Now, we've got the recently appointed new CEO, Ms. Pip Spence. She started to do a few things, but it's like she's flying around in a tiger moth, when what she really needs is a fighter, a strike fighter that's got a whole bunch of regulatory bombs sitting underneath the wings. And that's often the way things happen in Canberra, just very, very slowly, and actually that's not good enough. And I'm happy to stand up and say that. I'm happy to say that directly to Pip's face, in terms of she's doing something, but not quickly enough. We've got to move a lot quicker than that. So she's in some sense running around with a nutcracker, but not cracking the walnut. So what we need, in my view, is a sledgehammer. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about today. Now, there is an election coming up, and there's some chance that I'll get re-elected, and assuming that I do, I pledge today that if I get re-elected, I will introduce a Civil Aviation Regulation Transition Review Bill, and that will require the Minister to conduct an independent review to examine how US Federal Aviation Authority regulations can be translated into the Australian context. The FAA regulations clearly provide a safe operating environment, and we've just heard a thriving GA environment cognizant of safety. I want to basically have a situation where the Minister is required to conduct a review, not to reinvent the wheel, but to take the US wheel and see how that fits here in Australia. So I would like to, I'd like to introduce this bill. Once the review has taken place, and the review will require input from stakeholders, and it would be required that the review is independent. It won't be CASA running the review. It might be a little bit about what happened with Dom after the ATSB persecution, where the Canadians came and had a look at what the ATSB were doing. We might need to involve someone from a different jurisdiction to have a look at this. And my plan is that the bill will require the tabling of the review in the Parliament, and indeed then the need for the Minister to move to a situation where we adopt the FAA rules and essentially abandon the Australianised rules that are just a huge drag on industry. So that is what my intention is. Now, how do I go about doing that? Look, I'm going to give some praise to Susan McDonald, who's a relatively new senator, but she's been doing a fantastic job in and around aviation. She genuinely cares. As I said, she crossed the floor with the Angel Flight vote, the disallowance vote. She's also been chair of the RAC committee that's been looking into aviation. But, and I say this very respectfully, Susan's a part of a party, and she does have to stick within party lines. She knows what I'm announcing today, and her pathway will be is perhaps a little bit more orthodox than mine, but I will tell you, she didn't rule out support for me. And what we have to do is exactly what I did with a recent bill, and I've got a bit of experience now as a senator in terms of being able to achieve things in the Parliament. The way in which we do this, I introduced last year a bill that banned, or was seeking to ban the import of goods made from slave labour in Xinjiang. And what I did with that bill was I pushed it. I managed to have motions moved in the Senate at particular times. It was flipped off to a Senate inquiry, and I got the entire Uyghur community to support me. And that meant that they were supporting me in terms of if I needed a protest out the front of Parliament House, they were there for me. If I needed them to go and lobby every single member of Parliament and every single senator from their own local jurisdictions to give support to the bill, that's what they did. And I managed to get that bill through the Senate, and we would have worked to get it through the House had there been a little bit more time in this Parliament. Now, what actually happened was the politics of this, and I leveraged off this, I got the Parliament thinking about the China issue, and that I had a whole bunch of anti-slavery people saying, Rex, you've got to broaden it. You've got to broaden it to include all jurisdictions. And I said, no, I'm going to hold my course. And I held my course until the government came and tapped me on the shoulder and said, Rex, we're going to actually support your bill, but we are going to make it multi-jurisdictional. So it didn't pick out any one particular jurisdiction. And I was happy with that, but I still persisted publicly down the line that I was going, and when the committee handed down its report, a bipartisan report that supported the bill, supported the idea that we don't want to have people suffering in other jurisdictions, we don't want to have people wearing misery, driving in cars that are made from misery, and we don't want goods coming to Australia that actually compete with Australian industry except without labour costs. So we had, I got that through the Senate, and I reckon I could get a bill with your support through the Senate that would cause for this review to take place and set us on a pathway for change. At the very least, it would fire a shot across the bow at CASA to get out of the tiger moth and into something a lot more serious. So that's basically what I'm intending to do. I'm hoping that would cause the change that is necessary. It will take a little while. It'll take, if I were to get re-elected when the 47th Parliament resumes, I would have to have the bill drafted. It's a relatively easy bill to draft. I've already talked to the parliamentary drafters about it, and within 3 months we would table that bill and then start on a pathway, not with the Senate doing its work alone, but with all of the support of industry, perhaps coordinated by people like Ben, making sure that we drive the politics to a point where it's accepted as a necessary change. I know there are some people that might not like the FAA rules or might be a little bit concerned about those rules, but my view is that, and I've spoken to a number of people in the industry, my view is that the CASA regulations are the wrong starting point. It's like that Irish joke where the guy says to his mate, geez, how do you get to Dublin? He says, well, if you're going to Dublin, I wouldn't start from here. Anyway, so that's what I'm intending to do. I'm hoping that I can help your industry. We have to arrest the slide that's taking place. The undermining general aviation actually undermines the entire aviation industry here in Australia, and we need to change the way things are done. Thanks, Ben.
Let's get to the whole of this.
Thank you, Rex. Look, there's no doubt it's going to take political intervention to fix the mess that's been created here in Australia. Already online, we're broadcasting this via Facebook right now, and there's people that are saying, oh God, not another review. And in part, many of them are correct. We've had so many reviews. You know, Dick would speak to this, and I've now gone to so many events where Dick has spoken on these issues, and you've spoken clearly about it. Reviews ultimately end in a place where we get little done. But I agree with you, Senator, that we need to create a moment in time in which a fair and reasonable assessment of the world's most successful aviation regulations can be made so that we have a fighting chance of making a start to it. Now, I had a second Dick Smith quote, and it's the right time to say the quote now, and that is, I can't attribute the time. Dick might be able to help us with it, but the quote goes to the tune of that while CASA's been busy doing what it's been doing, Australia developed the Nomad and the US built the Space Shuttle. And it's the best analogy that you can give to the fact that we've been coupled with a regulatory system and matrix that has actually driven aviation backwards in Australia, while in the United States they're going forward. And if you look behind me right now, these two beautiful aircraft, these lovely Cirrus SR-22, where's our Cirrus guy? I'm hoping I'm going to get this right. This Cirrus SR-22 Australis generation aeroplanes. This represents where general aviation can be when you work within a system that supports innovation, it supports the advancement of aviation and allows manufacturers to deliver a product that then goes out and drives an industry forward for another 10, 20, 30 years. There are no Australian certified high-performance, four-place, composite, high-technology aeroplanes in the world, and there is a reason for that. There is also a reason why Australian airlines right across this country are outsourcing all of their maintenance offshore to get it done by American companies, not here in Australia. There is a reason why all over the world regulatory jurisdictions are basing their regulations on the US system, because it works, because it functions, because it produces a positive result. And no matter where we travel in aviation right across Australia, we hear time and time and time again, right across the country, that we need to bring Australia into alignment with the US regulations if we're going to stand half a chance at positioning aviation. I see Bob's nodding, Lorraine would be nodding, everyone else is nodding, if we stand half a chance at bringing aviation forward. And I know that that's what we want as an industry. So Rex, Senator, I make them say all the time, anything that we can do to support you to bring about that change, we'd like to find a faster solution than an inquiry, but I recognise that it's a great place to start. We need to get into it.
The reason I went to a review is because when I approached the draft and said, right, how would you draft the regulations that would be necessary here in Australia, they're not in a position to be able to do that. So the point of the review is not to say whether we will do this, but how will you go about doing this. So that's the fundamental difference. I've already spoken to drafters about simply transitioning the rules across, and they said that's too difficult, we need a lot of guidance to be able to do that. So it's a process of how, not whether.
I'm sold. I'll buy two. Just some quick statistics. We did some numbers late last night. It's been around 30 years that the Civil Aviation Safety Authority in Australia have been saying that they've been modernising and reforming Australia's regulations. Would that be a fair statement? We estimate that somewhere between 2.5 billion plus of Australian taxpayer money has been spent delivering the worst regulatory set you could possibly achieve. The depth of regulation that we wade through as an industry today is far greater than it was when CASA started this process. And from what we can see, and our assessment is the only beneficiary to CASA is in fact CASA. Now, I have been on the front line fighting for medical reform for pilots in this country for the entire time you've been a senator. And during that time, I have run into this statement from CASA so many times. Ben, we have so many other projects going on, we don't have resources. Yes, you're right, CASA. You went and wasted hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars, of the taxpayers' money pursuing regulations for community service flights that just simply was not required. And had we not tied up the National Safety Regulator with creating a whole bunch of bunkum, we would have had the resources to complete pilot medical reform and have got it done 5 years ago. How many of us that operate aviation businesses in this industry today have contacted CASA to get an answer on a simple problem only to have waited weeks, if not months? Show of hands. How many of us that are running aviation businesses that every time CASA imagines and dreams up a change, it costs us tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in manual rewrites simply to comply with the nonsense that they keep creating? Show of hands. How much longer can we as an industry continue to sustain this before we are out of money? Because I promise you, CASA aren't going to run out of money. They keep sucking it out of the Australian taxpayer year after year after year, and it's not going to stop until our parliamentarians put a stop to it. And I really do believe it is time for a broad and swift political intervention on this issue if we are going to stop it, because they don't know how to stop themselves. I do a lot of work with Ken Kinane from Amroba, and Ken and I work closely on a multitude of projects. And I mean, just basic things like what's happening to our apprenticeship training capability in this country. I mean, we're not getting young people through. We're not getting young people starting careers to be engineers anymore. And for as beautiful as these corporate jets and these wonderful general aviation aeroplanes are, and the large helicopters that Dick flies and all the rest of it, we're not going to be able to fly any of this stuff if we continue on the current trajectory. There is not going to be anyone there to support it. And now we're looking down the raft. I'm seeing Rob Simpson from down at Moorabbin. Thank you so much for coming along, Rob. For those that don't know, Rob is with the Moorabbin Airport Chamber of Commerce and runs a business down there, and they've done a huge amount of work on airport privatisation in Crescent. But if CASA continues these changes, we are not going to have businesses. We're going to continue to spend ourselves into oblivion. I received probably about an 8-page email last night from an air operator out west who actually met with the CASA board 3 days ago. And that air operator wrote an appraisal of that meeting and said to me, Ben, it's just a repeat We've jumped in the DeLorean, we've wound up the time gauge to take us back in time, and we've hit 88 mile an hour and we're out of there, and we've just gone back to the future to repeat the same mistakes, and it's the same rhetoric, and it's causing our industry enormous pain. I notice we've got Bob and Lorraine McGilvray here, and Brett Anderson from Anderson Aviation, representing the Bristol, the little blue aeroplane up the back. They know firsthand what an out-of-control regulator looks like and the damage that they can do to a business and to their livelihoods. And so many of you, the two gentlemen at the back there, we've actually we've done an interview before, we've spoken about the difficulty of dealing with a regulator who can't get approvals and can't actually do the work that they're there to do. This is real. This is real. The complaints of the industry are real. Glenn, you and I have spent hours talking about your particular issue. It is real. The damage they've done to our industry is profound and it has to be reversed. And I think that the only way, Senator, you can get that done is what you're suggesting, to take a quantum leap forward and to modernise Australia's aviation industry. So I'm sure we have a raft of questions that people would like to ask the Senator. I'm going to jump into that. And then I've asked for any of the industry representatives that have come along today, if they'd like to make a statement, that they're welcome to do so, and I'll be happy to hand over to them. So can we maybe start with questions for the Senator? Who'd like to fire a question out? You want to start? Fire a question out.
Senator, I represent the maintenance area, the maintenance training and everything in the system. The review this review talked about to move to the American system. Within the authority, under leaderships at different times, there has been a direction to do it. Even when we created Part 21, if you read the preamble part of the Part 21, it said it started the Civil Aviation Safety Regulations, and there's still a provision there today saying Civil Aviation Safety Regulations will be based on the past. Along comes a new management and change over. So the review somehow or other is to go to, if you must get involved permanently, to base it off the past, and putting in regulations. They don't even respect their own regulations to do what they should be doing.
All I can say is if the Parliament were to pass a bill that required a statutory review and it would have a time frame around it, then there would be an absolute expectation that the review would be carried out. Remember I said it's an independent review. It doesn't involve CASA. It will involve CASA, but it won't be CASA that is conducting the review. And the review is about not whether we should do this, but how we go about doing this. Again, it might turn out to be easy. When I spoke to the drafters, they shied away because they said, look, this is quite a complex area. We would need a lot of guidance. So that the report that is produced would essentially be almost a drafting instruction for the Ulster Parliamentary Council.
Tony White's got a question. Tony White, President of the Sport Aircraft Association.
Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Senator. Just want to get onto the RAP stuff particularly. It very much seems to me, having appeared in front of the Senate committee a couple of years ago, that CASA just continually evade, they never answer the question. I watched the last session and I think you asked a very direct question of Pip Spence, and you just got evasive answers. They never ever come back with an answer that we see in the public domain. How do you ever hold these regulators to account? I mean, Pip Spence, she gets over 600 grand a year. Her legal department head, Jonathan Alec, he's on over 500 grand a year. I mean, I worked in the in the private sector. Never ever got half that sort of money, but you know, every day my ass was grass if I didn't do my job. These people just get away with it, day in, day out. They never deliver, and that's the problem we have. Nobody holds these bureaucrats to account. No one says, "Are you doing your job?" How does that ever get fixed?
Unpack that.
Look, that is a difficult problem, and it's not limited to just RAF. It actually crosses, it actually goes right across the public service. And indeed, just recently, I had a matter referred to the Privileges Committee, and sadly, the Privileges Committee came out, and excuse the language, but I put this in a press release, they were as weak as piss. Basically, having officials refusing to provide documentation to the Senate on a Senate order, going back hundreds of years through the House of Commons, all of those powers of the Parliament were sorted out. Look, when I say that, all is not lost. You'll note that when we go into Senate estimates, we do shine a light on areas, and sometimes officials feel uncomfortable, and it might cause them to go and change direction slightly. The skill in politics, and politics is not about policy, politics is about positioning, is running a good campaign. And that's a campaign that makes officials feel uncomfortable, but also ministers feel uncomfortable. So it involves, as I said, a collective effort from right around the country, putting pressure on MPs. It involves the use of the media. No minister likes to see themselves being talked about in the media in an adverse way. With officials, I've not been afraid to call officials out. I've called officials liars under privilege, and that's almost where I've had to get to. Now, there's a lot of officials that do take me relatively seriously because, within a day, they'll be in the paper with something that won't get rubbed out forever when someone Googles their name. So there's lots and lots of good ways in which we can do that, but I agree that the Senate itself fails in not enforcing its oversight role, which is to ask questions, to get answers, to shine the light. Again, as an independent, I've got a little bit more flexibility over others that may not want to be quite as ruthless because they want to be a minister someday, and they're trying to sort of guide their career to the point where they're ministers. Lots and lots of problems there. I can't provide you with a really good answer. The Senate itself needs to look after that. But there are things that we can do, and we can keep putting pressure on the things. So I was invited to that board meeting in Adelaide, I think this week. I was unable to go, but again, that's because CASA are feeling a little uncomfortable. And as an independent senator, I would have no problems in telling the board exactly what I think about what's happening here.
Just on that, and I'll jump to you, Krisha, next. The issue of the board of CASA, Senator. We have a board that governs the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, and historically what has happened is that the board members have been appointed, and these board members really don't have a direct and meaningful connection with aviation. In many cases, they don't really have any aviation background at all. Whilst I can appreciate that you always need a certain degree of diversity in that board makeup, it would appear quite logical that what CASA is desperately in need of is real and tangible aviation experience at that board level in order to help support the Director of Aviation Safety and that executive team towards meaningful reform outcomes. And before I throw to you to get your comment on that, I was contacted by a PhD student. You call them a student? They're doing a PhD and they're preparing their thesis, and they've decided to do their thesis on advocacy and lobbying, and AOPA managed to score an honourable mention because back in the histories of AOPA around 1998, we ran a campaign to the Howard government, to the Howard government, calling on John Howard specifically to uphold the industry's right to have a board of CASA appointed that are actually aviation professionals. And I was contacted to give them a copy of that form letter, and then they said to me, by the way, would you also like the internal correspondence of the government at the time? which we discovered that AOPA managed to get a hold of a private fax number of John Howard in his office at Canberra House, and became quite a scandal. But all these years later, we're fighting on the same principle that CASA needs to be representative of the industry, that it's there creating regulation and it's there managing.
Yeah, okay. Then that issue was, of course, raised at the Senate inquiry, and there is a recommendation that flows from that. Not unusual for the Senate or for the Parliament to impose particular qualifications on boards. We've done it. For example, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority now has an Indigenous member of the board. So that's not something that's without the possibility of change. Again, there is a recommendation. One of the things that I do quite regularly is I'll have people who've got proposals, and you just got to have this in your back pocket and be watching out and helping me with this, is when a bit of aviation law goes through the Parliament, I can easily put it in an amendment provided it's related to the bill. And putting in an amendment like that that does cause the composition or the constitution of the board to have particular characteristics, I would be very, very happy to do. Again, I know Susan McDonald has made a recommendation about that in the Senate inquiry report.
All right. Appreciate it.
That was my question.
Was it?
Yes, it was.
Okay, Tony. Senator, I just want to borrow from the beef industry a number of years ago when there was a big stink over live export. And some bureaucrats got hauled over the coals, including the minister, for misfeasant behaviour. And I think that's a wonderful word, because it just seems to be something in law that says that we can hold our bureaucrats to account, and our elected officials for that matter. So we as citizens still have control of the purse strings. And I just sort of ask your thoughts on how that approach, the sledgehammer, might be taken to CASA over their misfeasant dealings with us as aviators.
So, can I just come to the tail end of that question, Steve, right on to this, if that's okay?
Is that right?
Yeah,
My name's Glenn Buckley. I'm not going to go on with the whole story here, but I know Lorraine and some of the people I've seen around here know of the background of my story. But I set up so I was going to take a few minutes, folks, but I set up a group, had a fly school that operated for 10 years. I've been operating in a certain format where other fly schools operated under my authorisation, with me taking full accountability for it. I sat down with CASA for 2 years. I invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in this program, working side by side with 10 CASA personnel, and got that product fully approved by CASA in April of 2016. In September of 2018, I got a letter from CASA. They shut my business down overnight. Overnight, I lost millions of dollars. I lost my home, I lost my mental health, I lost my physical health, I lost everything. Me and my wife now have $6,000 of liquid assets. My wife's had 4 days free of work in the last 4 years, free of work, away from work, as we try and rebuild our lives. And I put an allegation before Parliament in October of 2020 or November 2020 of misfeasance in public office against Dr. Jonathan Allen. Okay? Nothing happened. There's been no investigation. The Commonwealth Ombudsman's Office did an investigation, which is still ongoing after 3 years. They found he had no legal basis for it. He had no safety basis for it. And he's misrepresented to the Commonwealth Ombudsman Office that they didn't know what I was doing. I mean, sorry, that is absolute bullshit. That is a blatant lie and misleading Parliament. Allegation of misfeasance in public, got no investigation at all. That wouldn't happen in any organisation in Australia, any other government department, any private enterprise. So we have this option to make allegations of misfeasance in public office, but they get covered up. And I intend to write to you, I've got a long letter that I was working on the plan. I'm going to send you something, and I'm asking you to pursue that for me. For my wife's future welfare, for the staff that lost jobs, for the businesses that closed down. There was millions of dollars of damage. Overnight, no warning, and CASA's tried to distance itself from it. So there's no accountability in the organisation. It's criminal.
Okay, so some tricky questions in amongst all of that. So Thank you very, very much for that. Just so everyone understands what misfeasance is as opposed to malfeasance or indeed corruption. So corruption is where a public official gets a benefit, personal benefit from exercising a power or doing something like pork barrelling in order to get a right, would be, in my view, a form of corruption. Misfeasance is where you have a power, you are able to exercise it, but if you do it for the wrong reasons, it becomes misfeasance in public office. So a lot of times you can go to court and someone's cancelled something or they've done something and the court may find that they never had a power to do so. Misfeasance is where they do have a power to do so, but the motive for doing so was outside what was intended when the power was granted to the official. Misfeasance can take place, no question about that. The difficulty in dealing with misfeasance is, in some sense, you've got to find the trail that shows that the official did it for some other reason than what was intended when the power was granted to the official. In terms of the Parliament doing this, and I remember your story getting raised in the ARA committee. Susan McDonald, I think, raised it. Again, she's done a great job. Parliaments are not courts, so we can seek to change processes or cause a change in a process, but where someone has had a harm done to them, the only place where you can really deal with misfeasance is in a court. Okay, that's where you get the remedy. So the Parliament is not a court. We respect the difference between a court and the Parliament. We're about getting systematic changes to try and prevent a story like yours from happening again. So in this instance, it's very difficult for a House of Parliament or a Senate. Whilst we can uncover it, we can allow you to express your view, and you can, parliamentary privilege allows anyone who makes a submission to a Senate inquiry to put on the record things that they might otherwise be sued for if they were outside the Parliament. Parliamentary privilege actually belongs to you, not to me. It's your privilege. I exercise it on your behalf. It allows me to say inside the Parliament what you can't say outside of the Parliament.
I'll say it outside.
Yeah, well, so you can, if you want to say it outside the Parliament, you're a mature adult. You can do what you like. I don't recommend it when you're publishing it, but nonetheless, that's the difficulty. Is that it is courts that deal with those sorts of breaches of the law. Parliaments create laws, and there's two functions of the Parliament. We create laws, and we also conduct oversight of government. So we can shine the light, we can ask the questions, but we can't prosecute. The only thing we can prosecute for is contempt of the Senate. And we can jail people, and that happened in, I think, 1956. Fitzpatrick and Brown is the High Court case. I remember just recently, there was a guy from Facebook or contractor to Facebook that turned up in the UK, and he had documents that a committee had called for, but Mr Zuckerberg wasn't prepared to give to them. The Sergeant at Arms went out to the hotel, took the guy back to the Parliament, said, "You've got to hand over these documents." When he said no, he said, "Well, we're going to just put you in the jail for a little bit." And eventually he handed over those documents. So there is the power to do things, but the only power we have in terms of jailing or punishing someone is, in actual fact, the contempt powers.
Sorry to take over. I'll follow that up then, and I'll follow this up with writing in it. Jane Carmody, the previous CEO of Crescent,
Before Parliament, to the Senate, made a statement that I had stalked and assaulted CASA staff. That I had stalked and assaulted. I have never stalked, I have never assaulted any CASA employee. If I had done that, there would be a police report, there would be a work cover claim, there would be a witness statement. It is a blatant lie. And I've asked CASA to publish the supporting information, and I will again at the letter I'm about to release this weekend. If CASA has publicly made that statement that I have stalked, that's going to people's homes and following around outside the workplace. Assaulting is hitting somebody. I mean, that's a blatant lie to damage my character in the parliament.
I do recall that statement being made. And look, as senators, we sit and we listen. We don't have all of the information, but there is an opportunity for you to come back through the Senate. And I deal with people all the time where I would then put a question on notice or a demand on CASA to show the evidence that it occurred. And that's something that a senator can do. So, there are ways in which you can have recourse, and there's also ways in which if someone does say something about you under privilege, there are rights under Senate procedures for you to go to in this case, the RAC committee, and seek a right of reply that will be published as well.
But it only gets published as well, it doesn't make it retracted. I've been trying to contact Gladys Liu, my local MP, for 3 years about this. Sorry to load you up, she hasn't contacted me, she's completely ignored me, so I'm going to write to you on Monday about those allegations of stalking and assaulting, if you don't mind. It'll be after the election when you're re-elected, and I'd like you to follow that.
Yeah, well, putting a question on notice to identify where something was said in the Hansard and asking the department to show evidence of that is something that's pretty easy to do.
Excellent, thank you.
Appreciate quickly, and I'm going to come straight to you, Lauren.
Oh, I've actually got 2 questions. Is that too?
Yeah, no.
Okay. Firstly, how would a hung parliament help or hinder your position? And can I ask the second one as well while I've got you? Sorry, request glasses. How would you reconcile changing towards the FAA regs with the views of the airline industry who have unlimited resources? Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so dealing with the first question, I'll never have to deal with a home parliament because I'm independent. If we have a hung house, because just so everyone doesn't feel too disturbed about the idea of a hung parliament, we have that in the Senate almost always. It's a very normal situation in the Senate. The government doesn't have the numbers, and always, if there's a dispute or a controversial bill or regulation or instrument, the Labor Party may vote against the government may vote differently, and it will come down to the crossbench. That's the advice there is in those controversial spaces. Always make sure the crossbench is well briefed. In the House, it's funny, Rebecca Sharkey once said to me, "Geez, Rex, I like the way you guys can order the production of documents. Why can't the House do that?" I said, "Rebecca, you can. You never have the numbers because the government always controls the numbers." If you went to a hung parliament, I mean, the only question that really needs to be answered by these independents, and I saw Josh Frydenberg put out something saying, these damn independents aren't telling us which party they to support. And my answer to that is I don't support parties. I represent constituents. So what happens in those circumstances? There would be a need to guarantee supply, in order for a government to be formed. If I were an independent, I would never give up my right to vote no confidence in the House against the government. That keeps them in check. But then each and every bill is voted on the merits. That's exactly how we do things in the Senate right now. So instead of the government doing what it does now, if you're in the Parliament, you see the bells ringing, and you look up and see a green bell, I know what the answer is going to be, because the government controls the numbers. When the red bell rings, it's much more exciting, okay? And all that's going to happen is the government will have to do in the House what it currently has to do in the Senate. So it's not a big deal. In terms of a bill such as what I'm proposing, that sort of bill potentially could get through the House as a starting point instead of in the Senate. Those bills never get through the House because the government, again, always controls the numbers. But it may open up possibilities, and that becomes part of the strategy for working the bill that I've proposed through the Parliament, because you've got to get through both houses. Now, in relation to your second question, just again.
You want me to read it to you again? Okay. How would you reconcile changing towards FAA regs with the views of the airline industry who have got unlimited resources?
Sure. It may be the case, and this is why I say there's a review that's required. It might be that you can carve out the airline industry from general aviation. So we have different sectors, and that's the reason why the review is necessary. I'm not an expert in being able to deal with that situation. That's where we'll get someone who really does understand aviation working whether or not a carve-out can work. And that may neutralise the RPT side of the aviation sector. Again, I don't know whether that's possible. That's the point of doing the review.
Okay, Lorraine.
I just wanted to, I prepared a little bit of a story here because I think one of the things that we'd probably all identify with as an industry, and Ben's sort of looking at me because he doesn't know what I've written, so he said he's going to have to trust me on this one. So just bear with me while I just read this out to you. And normally I would speak off the cuff, but I thought that might have been a little bit dangerous under the circumstances given what we've been through with Anderson Aviation and the Bristol. And I think some elements of our story will resonate with a lot of people here today. So sometimes people have businesses and have years of fighting. Time ripped from your life where you stand still, your business destroyed and damaged, your emotions drained as well as your pockets. Years you never get back. You are constantly running from the beast, trying to stay ahead of it. The beast, a government organisation. People given positions and pay grades that far exceed their worth and in many cases their ability and knowledge level. Individuals and departments that seem to revel in playing judge, jury and executioner. People that can control your business, control an aircraft type, control operations. And if they decide they don't like you, or don't like a particular aircraft, or they have a personal grudge, they can get you, and they will. Protected by a department, protected by a hierarchy, and protected by in-house lawyers. Corruption with a far greater focus on individual empire building, nothing to do with safety, nothing to do with helping to nurture or grow our industry. Collusion and closing ranks to protect each other. Stifling Australian aviation, pushing us further behind the rest of the world, leaving us with depleted and seriously low numbers of licensed aircraft maintenance engineers and pilots. Contracting to a private company, a significant part of our industry, the main feeder to our commercial aviation, light aircraft, light sport aircraft and ultralight sector, which many airline and other commercial pilots come from. Another organisation with a serious lack of expertise. Accident investigations conducted by this private company, where investigators come from the very same organisation administering the rules for the operation of those very same aircraft. Does conflict of interest come to mind? The same private company, accident reports not released to manufacturers of the aircraft or the broader aviation community, enabling the manufacturers or industry to learn from an accident. Was it pilot error? Why? Was it a failure of the aircraft? And if it was, why? A regulator and organisation that takes the approach of power over you rather than a responsibility to you. A responsibility to enhance safety, not to hinder it. A responsibility to educate, not just regulate. And a responsibility to help you get your business up and running in a reasonable time frame at a reasonable cost. And a responsibility to assist in the growth of the aviation industry. An organisation that has initiated regulations that are so cumbersome, so onerous, so unreasonable, and not even able to be interpreted easily. Regulations where some even require a plain English version so that industry participants have some chance of understanding them. That is even if you even have had time to read them. And I think my husband said the new Part 91 was something like 187 pages, or somewhere around that in the plain English version. If only you could keep up with the constant regulatory changes, and we all know here it is impossible to do that. An organisation that has you so caught up in trying to keep up that it often contributes to operators and maintenance organisations being so stressed about maintaining compliance to regulations, so difficult to understand that it does not value add to safety at all, not ever. In fact, quite the contrary. This is a snapshot of our present CASA, a corrupt, colluding, bullying, intimidating, bureaucratic beast that waves a big legal stick with the aviation industry in Australia in fear of survival. When did this conduct and culture do anything to enhance safety and grow and support an essential industry? Yes, we are essential. Airlines, search and rescue, agricultural operations, spreading, spraying, pest control, charter, flight training, survey work, aerial mustering, flood relief, aerial firefighting, power line and pipeline inspection, air ambulance, bank runs, freight, scenic flights for tourism, and so on it goes. This is also the same regulator with the same culture that is responsible for our airlines. So think about that when you hop on the next flight to go to Brisbane. If you step up and challenge decisions of this regulator, then be aware of the retribution, because they can and will try and break you, ruin you financially and emotionally, and take your livelihood away. These people are public servants. They are supposed to be there to support us, not just regulate. And I would welcome seeing CASA go back to being a department that can be held accountable. If you challenge a decision of CASA, you will encounter everything that contradicts every element of the CASA published philosophy. I am here because I have spent over 2 years fighting for and supporting the Bristol aircraft type, an aircraft subject of a vendetta, an attack on its reputation and of the manufacturer, an attack that destroyed the business of an Australian importer and distributor, and Brett Anderson's here with us today. An attack where CASA would not tell us what they required from us to be, as they put it, satisfied. A CASA that we can prove have lied. A CASA that permits conduct that is indicative of abuse of power, denial of natural justice and procedural fairness. A CASA that makes a claim then provides no proof to support that claim. An attack that, when we did not gain ground until CASA were faced with going to the federal court, then magically they withdrew the imposed safety notice and operating limitation as they based the unproven claim that the aircraft was not safe. It isn't unsafe. It wasn't then, and it isn't now. This action of the CASA had the real potential to damage the trade relations with a foreign company, leaving Australia with a reputation that CASA was impossible to deal with, unreasonable, unfair, wrong and unjust in their actions. This was an attack that saw us at the highest levels of government, saw us meeting and speaking with the Czech Republic Ambassador and in particular the Deputy Consul General on a regular basis. Copious amounts of documentation to the DPM at the time, Michael McCormack, multiple submissions to the Commonwealth Ombudsman, submissions to the CASA ICC, Industry Complaints Commissioner. All this time, Glenn, you understand, is hours, days, weeks, months, and they become years. Many a discussion with this man here, Ed Morgan, CEO of AOPA. You have listened to me rant, yell, express my frustration, express my sadness for the aviation industry, and you've listened to me cry. We are men and women that are committed to this industry, and trust me, you have to have a passion for it, Senator, because we don't make a lot out of it a lot of the time, because it has become harder and harder to survive and to survive CASA. Your biggest threat. Our biggest threat to aviation safety in this country is CASA, our very regulator. Where you must, I must say, to be fair, I cannot go on without mentioning that there are many good people in CASA, and I know quite a few of them. There just simply is not enough of them. and they share many of industry's frustrations but are often powerless to do anything for fear of losing their jobs. Where you must try and stand up to the bottomless pockets of CASA Legal, where they can just continue to beat you into submission or run you out of business because you simply cannot match the resources they have, and trust me, CASA Legal know that. And when CASA know that something is wrong or someone has been wronged, no one does anything about it. Individuals survive to do it all again to the next victim. In support of a business and a manufacturer, I have become a target myself. I've been told by a CASA employee that my reputation is damaged because of me fighting for what is right. My reputation? It's kind of like, what about CASA's reputation? That I have reported the feeling of having my work being stalked, my aircraft files being accessed from an unknown device at all hours of the night. That CASA either don't think a potential security breach is serious, or maybe they don't care about your personal details or all the details related to your aircraft, or maybe they know who it is and are covering for them. Whatever it is, the feeling I have is terrible. And what have they done since August last year to address this? Very little. Do I have any answers yet? No. I stand here and I thank you all for being here. I thank Senator Patrick for being here and supporting general aviation in Australia. And I hadn't written it down because I didn't know I was going to be here, but thank you, Dick Smith, for coming to it. It's great to see you. And Ben, for making this possible today, because it's so important and so critical to all of us and to the industry. This is critical. General aviation in Australia is in crisis, and I don't think there's a person here that would disagree with that. CASA is in crisis, and it has become that way because it has been allowed to develop into the incompetent, incapable organisation that we see today. When CASA get you in their sights, you will know, because the attack will be relentless, never letting up and forever changing course. And after a short time, CASA will have you so confused as to the real issue that your head will be spinning, never mind your aircraft. Therefore, I call on Ms Pip Spence to do what we are paying her to do, please, and pull this organisation into line, and for the government, via the good likes of yourself, Senator Patrick, to support her in doing that, because I have not met Ms Spence, but I do know that she would be having a very difficult time with the organisation that she has to deal with. Because now CASA uses safety as a reason for everything that they do, when it's actually not safety at all. So my final statement is, drain this swamp and relocate the crocodiles before there is no one left. Thank you very much for bearing with me.
Thanks very much for sharing. It's almost a Senate submission, actually. I think you could make that submission to the ongoing inquiry. Look, what I'll say to you is that my approach to the world is, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer is one bite at a time. And I tend to take on little chunks where I can. In your situation, it's very similar to what was being talked about with misfeasance, where officials are exercising a power for the wrong reasons. I probably should have mentioned a few things. One of them is that there are mechanisms available, and I know that they cost both financially and have a human cost to them. One of the reasons we want to have a federal ICAC is that it's often difficult to get through those firewalls you talk about, where officials are conducting activities, and the very nature of an ICAC is it's not a court. It can't make any finding that puts anyone in jail, but they get given extraordinary powers that enable them to, when an allegation is raised, to tap the phones of officials and listen to what they're saying. And they might get to the end where someone like an ICAC makes a finding and they're unfortunately not allowed to necessarily take some of that evidence to a court, because the courts still work on admissible evidence only. But that's the difference between the ICAC and the court, is the ICAC can do things that would otherwise not be permissible, but at least you get a finding of corruption that generally gets rid of people anyway. So that is the importance of something like an ICAC, to be able to deal with those sorts of problems. The idea of an independent statutory commissioner overlooking aviation is another thing that ought to be very seriously considered. It's my view that we should have someone that does that, someone who has the powers of, say, the Ombudsman. They can just court the Ombudsman has these extraordinary powers. If you go and look at, I think it's Section 36 of the Ombudsman's Act, it might be 13, I can't remember, but the Ombudsman has these incredible powers to demand any document, whether it's legally privileged, whether it's a cabinet document, to be able to carry out his or her functions. And that's the sort of powers we might want to give a statutory aviation complaints commissioner, because you always need to have the right checks and balances in place, whether it be an ICAC that people are fearful of, whether it be a statutory commission that people are fearful of doing the wrong thing. That becomes a deterrent. The other thing is when things do happen, and I've done this with Ben. Ben's been great about this. He'll call me up. He raises concerns about individuals in the industry, because it's really hard as an individual, and can be quite dangerous as an individual, to come out and make a statement. But Ben represents a group of people in the industry, much harder to stop him working with someone like me. I'm not afraid to raise anything in the Senate. I just have to be well briefed. So there's a range of perhaps potential future options, but we do have the AAT that can deal with wrong decisions, and the federal courts. And I know they're expensive, but sometimes working together a strategy, and Ben and I have just recently talked about a strategy in relation to one thing that's going wrong, where we get the Senate working together with ministers, with industry, to make it so that people end up backing down. Dom experienced that with the transplant issue, where we had pilots that weren't being approved. The right amount of pressure coming from the Senate, I think, helped to resolve that issue, and Dom's nodding there. You just have to have the right sort of strategy. You're never on your own. If you can get someone like Ben, the AOPA organisation, and working in conjunction with the senators, and if necessary ministers, and indeed going straight to CASA as well.
I know we touched on it lightly, but I think this next parliamentary term is the time for the Pilot Bill of Rights. We need to take a huge lesson from the United States in their desire to build a framework that protects the rights of the industry participant, to ensure that when they run into these situations, that number one, all the evidence is available to them. The complaint that we hear so often in regard to CASA is over-regulation. But another one is that when you find yourself on the wrong side of them, you can't get the information from them. They only give you a little bit. They hold everything back. They make you basically commit yourself to explaining yourself without the facts available to yourself. In many cases, you can accidentally incriminate yourself. And that's really what they're hoping for. And it really is the wrong perspective. So we need to look to the US, to what has been a very successful instrument put through their government system, and to look at how we can do that. And I want to make sure that this next parliamentary term that we can get that done. And I'm going to go to David Iron from the Piper Society. David.
Senator, just like to ask you a question about the review and the drafting of the review. You mentioned that it would take some time for it to be drafted, and that you did mention on a couple of occasions there that you're not an aviation stumps, but we need to make sure that we're well organised and well versed for our draft, and that we need to be very calculated on how we approach it, because again, I'll repeat, you've just heard stories of the culture of CASA. There's people here that are scared of CASA. There's people in aviation here that have no idea what is right or wrong. So from my point of view and my members of general aviation is, I'm suggesting that the draft that you put together should be put together spearheaded through someone, a working team like Ben or AOPA, people that have experience, and people we need to remove emotion, because we're only going to have one go at this. We need to be very clever at how we do it. And you as a senator, you've also realised that you can't change the world. You go in there and the word is compromise, but we call it common ground. Our draft, when we drew this draft, it needs to be very calculated. It needs to be thought about. We also need to make sure that drafting has in place a fallback situation, because, I'll repeat again, you've heard the environment that CASA have. Their tentacles go quite far. So we need to make sure your draft, our draft, and how we do this is well and truly covered.
To add to that, you'd be the only person in the entire country that would have described me as unemotional. Do you know that? I just want to add to that. Cessna SIDS. Hands up, who's heard of Cessna SIDS? All right, give it up for SIDS. No? Okay. When Cessna SIDS was introduced into Australia, it was a supplementary inspection directive by Cessna. They were concerned that aeroplanes are getting old. So they put together a framework for additional inspections. And CASA went out and consulted with the industry and said, let's talk to industry. And right across the aviation industry, people were saying, look, it has its benefits, but if you raft this through as a mandatory requirement and you demand that an aircraft owner tackle it all in one hit, you will destroy the value of the airplanes. You will create an environment where no one will want to own these aircraft. You'll do immeasurable damage to the aviation industry, and you won't achieve a safety outcome, because all you're doing is you're stopping aviation, you're not actually encouraging aviation. So CASA came out and CASA said, in the interests of bringing Australia into alignment with international standards, we're making SIDS mandatory in this country. Where the United States, it was not mandatory. It was mandatory for commercial operations, but it was not a mandatory function for private and what we do with airwork. So CASA drove it through as a mandatory function. Years later, after crushing the value of these aeroplanes, causing millions of dollars worth of unnecessary expense on the industry, and creating a bow wave of aircraft that have been sold off out of the country, CASA have now announced that in the interests of bringing Australia into international alignment, we're now removing Cessna SIDS as a mandatory requirement, and we're finishing off a public consult right now. And I think that harkens to what David's saying, is that the industry is now well aware of the game of what it is when CASA says we will lead the consult on something. What that means is we're going to connive and craft our own idea of what we're going to do. We're going to spend a month after month after month after month after month. We're going to have all these technical working groups, and we're going to get to the end of the process, and we know exactly as CASA, we know what we're going to do, but we're going to go out and do this big public consult, and then we're going to tell you we're doing what we're doing anyway. So I think what David is asking directly to the Centre is, how do you, in your capacity, ensure that this process can actually be led, bringing the industry directly into it, so that CASA themselves have no ability to take the train and derail it entirely?
Okay, so there's a couple of things I need to talk about to help you, David, and I apologise, maybe I've confused things. The drafting that I will be doing is of a bill that requires the government to conduct the review and for it to be done independently. So I'll spend time with the drafters, and they'll work through how you define independent, what the timeframes may be, and they'll express that in legal terms that are consistent with the way our legislation works. I will then table that bill in the Senate. It will go to a Senate inquiry where you might look, you might talk about how the independent review might be done and perhaps what its scope might have to be, and that informs the bill prior to it getting voted on. So the thing that I draft is nothing to do with aviation in a sense, because I don't have the expertise and no one in the Parliament has the expertise. That bill simply places a legal requirement on the government to conduct an independent review on how we bring FAA regulations to Australia. Noting there may need to be carve-outs. There may be some things where you say it simply isn't appropriate for the Australian environment. And then there might be the need to look at how, moving forward, as FAA regulations change in the United States, so those changes migrate back to Australia, whether or not they just immediately get declared or tabled as a regulation in the Australian Parliament, or whether there's some process that goes about that. So that's what. So there's two things that take place. One is a bill that requires the government to do the review, okay, and then at the end of the review to implement the review within a particular time frame, okay, and it is not the Parliament's role. When I'm thinking about an independent review, it might be that the FAA is asked to assist and run the review, but it definitely won't be CASA, which answers your question, is that CASA may have input, and that would be appropriate in my view, but the review would be run by someone like the FAA, which is why I mentioned the ATSB when it had the Canadians come in and do a review on the way in which they were doing work. So hopefully that addresses the going off of the rails.
Okay, any other questions for the Senator? We're going to get to our last questions because he's going to be very short on time today.
This is very short, Senator, but the fastest growing industry in aviation Australia at the moment is the drone industry. And CASA estimates, I think, there's at least 1 million drones operating in Australia. And new regulations require registration of any drone over 250 grams and licensing. And so there's an emerging and enormous number of people coming into this sector who are going to come under the control and the management of CASA, and I suspect that we need to harvest these new entrants to this industry who are going to significantly outnumber all existing operators, pilots, aircraft numbers and everything else. And either CASA might self-implode in the process of trying to manage this enormous increasing new cohort, which is becoming more sophisticated. And if you're going to try and follow the FAA rules, you need to make sure that there's some coordination between these sectors, because I think CASA's game is changing significantly. They've got tens of thousands of new licensed operators coming on board, and maybe 500,000 or more registered drones they have to manage every year.
The Senate did an inquiry into drones, and I was the cause of that actually, because there was a disallowance that was, or there was a regulation that was going through the Senate, and I was an advisor, and I suggested to my then boss, Nick Xenophon, that we needed to disallow something. And the great role of an independent, the Labor Party didn't want to do anything, the Liberal Party didn't want to do anything, but once I move a disallowance, they are forced to take a position. And what actually happened in background is that they said, well, let's not disallow, but everyone will agree to an inquiry. So it was an inquiry that was done, I think it was around about 2017, into drones. Again, the purpose of the review is to look and say, is it appropriate to bring their drone regulations back to Australia, the FAA regulations back to Australia? And if it is, that might be included. So I talked about carve-outs, but there might be also drop-ins if indeed that's necessary. But you actually make a good point about getting the numbers up of people that might support this, and that might include the drone industry. Again, that's a role for me when I get into the 47th Parliament, hopefully, and drop this bill. Then there's a strategy that gets played out where all of you guys work together to lobby to get the right changes taking place.
I've just been asked to raise the issue of pilot medicals. Who thinks the issue of pilot medicals is an important issue? Predictable. Senator, we have a situation where we started the push for private pilot medical reform in 2017. You will probably remember it. Lots of telephone calls around that time. And at the time we started that process, we came to you and said the United States have actually rolled out now a very sensible, the key there is, remember, United States, it's all sensible over there, a sensible medical reform that allows a private driver's license to be the basis of your medical and decouples the pilot from having to have this complex involvement with a government regulator. AOPA in the United States had coined the phrase that the fitness to fly was not a relationship between government and pilot, but instead doctor and pilot. And in our case as an aviation industry, I think that it's fairly universal that everybody is of the same opinion that if we're fit to drive a motor car, where we can fill the car up with passengers, and I can drive at 110 kilometres an hour down a road, and someone can be in their car full of passengers doing 110 in the opposite direction, and just the shortest of distance can separate our vehicles from whether it be a B double passing there or a passenger car, that if I'm fit to drive that, why am I not fit to climb into an aeroplane with one passenger and fly out in parts of Australia where we'd be struggling to hit something? And so we thought at the time, and I think that the Senate thought at the time, that CASA was going to make good on this. That was 2017, and I checked the clock this morning and it's telling me it's 2022, and CASA still have not been able to arrive at an outcome to finalise this medical reform package. And I was having a conversation with our representative on that technical working group just the last couple of days, and he was saying, Ben, they're unable to develop a consensus. And I'd asked him, well, where was the hang up? And he said, well, all the doctors on the technical working group aren't prepared to relax the system. I said, so hang on a second. So the technical working group, which CASA has put together, which comprises of DAMEs, no offence to Sean, my name is Sean, you know I love you. But we've got all these DAMEs, these aviation medical examiners, who are on this technical working group for private pilot medical reform, basically refusing to give a consensus to bring the reforms forward, largely because their concerns are it takes food off their table. How do we fix this? How do we bring a solution forward that ends this never-ending delay? I can't imagine in any sense of reasonableness that if the world's largest, most complex and most successful aviation regulator could have got this done 5 years ago, that even Australian timeframes would take an additional 5. What can you be doing in the next parliament to throw the sledgehammer voluntarily at this issue?
Yeah, thank you, Ben. I do recall the story of the two cars separated by a white dotted line, a magical white dotted line, and thinking, how would that ever get past occupational health and safety nowadays? But thankfully there were ways before there were RGS experience. And I also note that that white dotted line, you can actually run out to the middle and stand on and balance as you try to cross a busy road as well, and it somehow protects you. So, look, to come back to your question, I've learned a lot since I went into the Senate, and it's really, I've been the most effective that I've been over the last 12 months. I know how to work the numbers, I know how to play the politics, I know how to work the media. That takes a little bit of time to be able to do that. I know the standing orders. I moved a disallowance about 2 months ago on proxy advisors. And as I stood up and said to the President, I seek leave to have my motion taken as formal, the government, and they never do this, said no. They denied me leave. And I was able to very quickly jump into a mode where I said, well, pursuant to continued notice of motion, I move that so much of the standing orders be suspended to allow me then to move the motion. And so the government were playing tactics with me in the Senate And I got past that point where we suspended sounding orders, had the vote, and the motion was disallowed. I did that because I've got experience now, and if I were to tackle this problem, first thing I'll say, and it also goes back to what Dave was saying before, I try and compartmentalise things. So trying to change the culture of CASA, that's a very difficult thing to do. In relation to my FAA proposal, I would keep that strictly looking at how you get regulations from the US into Australia. And I would try not to pollute that with other issues because it just complicates things. However, when you've got something like the medical examiner's issue, if there is I can stand up and do speeches on it, I can draw people's attention to it, you can have a separate inquiry into it. The real power I have as a senator is enlivened, and it might take 6 months, 12 months, is enlivened when a bill comes through the Parliament that is associated with aviation. And that's the point at which I, through my experience now, I would say I would need to have an amendment ready to go that actually implemented the solution, the right solution, whatever that right solution is. And so that's something I can talk to you about. It's one of those things where you don't necessarily get to have the ability to do that until the government send a bill through that's related. And I'd be happy to do that. Again, I can see a vote on that would require, the Labor, the government supporting, or if we've got a balance of power situation in the House, making sure crossbenchers in both places are in favour of it, and at least one major party. That's the role of you guys in background to be able to get that support. I'm happy to drop an amendment in on a bill that then forces it to come to a vote. All of the regulations that CASA put out are what are called delegated legislation. Section 1 of the Australian Constitution says it is the Parliament that makes the rules, that makes the laws. That is our responsibility. We do so in public, not behind closed doors, and we do delegate regulations to places like CASA. But at any point, the Parliament can take charge of things and move an amendment that will force a regulation out of existence if necessary. So I'm happy to do those sorts of things. I just have to be careful, again, of managing my time as an independent, because in my party, I'm the Shadow Minister for Defence and the Shadow Attorney General and the Shadow Aviation Minister and the Shadow Health Minister and all those sorts of things. So it's about managing time and getting the right assistance in the background. But I'm not constrained by a party. You can go to a Labor Party member, you can go to a Liberal Party, but I'm not being, I'm not trying to be derogatory in any sense here. They may nod and say, yeah, I agree with you, Ben, but they won't have the ability to move an amendment without party endorsement. The party will say, oh, it's a bit controversial. I don't have that problem.
I'll make a comment to that, and that is how many times and so many other of my colleagues have had, Tony, I know that you've had this said to you, we will go in and we'll have a meeting with one of the major parties and we'll be talking about sensible reform, and they'll say, look, Ben, I'm really, I'm with you and I want to get this done, but I just don't think I can, because if we go out tomorrow and we announce this, the other side will attack us. So best we don't do it.
So you give the job to an independent, I move the amendment, and then they are forced to vote on it.
Beautiful. Okay, I'm going to throw it to Marjorie Pagani here. Marjorie needs no introduction, from Angel Flight, and probably one of our biggest supporters for general aviation and fight to protect the rights of pilots.
Thanks very much, Ben. Thanks for inviting me here. I just want to start off with a great big thank you, as many of you have done, to Senator Patrick. He's been our real champion in our committees, in estimates, and also Senator McDonald. The Deputy Prime Minister has also been very supportive of us and is very supportive of general aviation. But many of you will know our story, and it harkens back to what many of you have said here today about accountability. Yes, there are processes by which you can take the regulator on. They have unlimited pockets. They have an entire legal team. We were fortunate enough to be able to take them on through the generosity of benefactors who supported our cause. We paid, in the end, apart from our fees, about $400,000 to CASA, and in every case we were asked to pay more than we had to pay in every single case. However, that's another matter, and I stand here bravely before you because I'm in the midst of negotiating with CASA in respect of their new suite of community service flight regulations. But in terms of accountability, I know with CASA I'm trying to move forward, I'm trying to redevelop and reset our relationship with them because they don't forget. All of you know that. But when we took them on, it was on the basis that the CSFs had no safety case. For example, 30-day takeoffs and landings. Nowhere else in the world, not in jet airliners, not the FAA, not anywhere. Where was your safety case? And that's so with everything. The 100-hourly having to be done in private flight, you couldn't go out to 12 months. What was the impact of that on our pilots? Well, if they were very regular, frequent and experienced pilots, they were clocking up their 100 hours in 3 months. Their choice then was to get their annual inspection done, again trebling their cost for the year, or stop flying. For us, they could fly anywhere else or anyone else, but not in a community service flight. So the upshot of that was, if we had very regular, and we all know recent experience is all that really counts. You can have 20,000 hours 50 years ago, but might not help. All these people who are very current, recent, regular pilots, they're the ones who were allowed to fly for us. But if you flew 20 hours a year, you could keep going till the end of that year. And so on it went. And we fought very hard against that, and they've dropped that aspect of the regulations. But in terms of the safety case, I asked right from the beginning of this process in 2017, when it was mooted, the CSFs, just give us your safety case for these proposed rules. That's all we want. Just show us some data, show us some research, some figures. Today, as I stand here, 5 years later, I'm still asking, and I still haven't got a single safety case. The head of flight standards stood up in the federal court. We lost the case, essentially on the basis that if CASA believes, without a safety case, that it's in the interest of safety, that will do. That's enough. That was, I'm an officer of the court, I'm not here to besmirch the court process. But that was the effect of the decision. I still ask today for the safety case, and I still haven't got it. So in terms of accountability, I have either been present at or listened to almost every RAT or estimates committee in relation to aviation safety. I have heard the likes of Senator Patrick and Senator McDonald and others right across the political spectrum say to the authority, well, you said you had a safety case, can we see it? Where's your report? Senator Patrick, I think I've heard you say that probably 10 times. Where is it? I'll take that on notice, Senator, and I'll bring it back to you next time. 2022, it still hasn't happened. In the AAT, in the case, in federal court, the head of safety standards was asked a lot of questions about that very topic. Did you, when you made a determination that pilots were under pressure, did you ask a single pilot? Well, look, we did some research. Did you ask a single pilot? No. Passengers were uninformed. Did you ask a single passenger? No. Your data was wrong. It was taken from minor data from a time when CSFs weren't in existence and not a pilot was asked. Did you get Angel Flight's data? Yes, we did. Did you have a look at that to see what the safety statistics were? No, we can't trust Angel Flight because it was their data. And we went from having a 16 times safety incident record, 16 times more than GA at first, then it was 9, then it was 7, in a court case it was 5, and then an admission they hadn't used any actual data. So those of us who take the regulator on, as I said, I'm hopeful of better outcomes. I'm trying to reset the relationship, and I'm hoping my appearance here won't set that back. And as somebody else just said earlier, there are good people in CASA. There are some good people, and I'm working with some good people, but the culture is the problem. And even though we heard in a court case there was no safety case, totally contrary to what was said in every single RAT and estimates hearing I've been to. The answer was very different there, but those answers are privileged, they can't go into a court. So there is no accountability, and I think that's what Senator Patrick's trying to do, is to make this authority accountable, as is every department so structured. And we wholly support that. I feel the pain of people like Glenn Buckley and Bristol Aircraft. We're in a different category, but some things just don't make sense. And regulations that have been put in place, and I can tell you, when I asked initially why this had been done of the head of National Head of Flight Standards, the answer to me was, well, Marjorie, we had to do something. But I still don't know why. So I really applaud AOPA for putting on this forum. We will continue to help. We have over 3,500 pilots, and I think we are an organisation Australia-wide that does a lot for general aviation, in that we give people a reason to fly. We supplement their costs with fuel, so it enables the younger pilots to fly more, the flight instructors to get out. So we're a great supporter, obviously, of general aviation. That's our core. We're nothing without our wonderful pilots who do so much for us. But we have to put them through a lot because of these CASA regulations that have no foundation in safety. So thank you, AOPA, thank you, Ben, and thank you very much, Senator Patrick, for being such a champion for us. We really appreciate it.
I had the pleasure of actually attending a number of the Senate inquiries with you, Marjorie, and to this very day, I am shocked that that ATSB report was ever allowed to be published. It is just the most fraudulent document. It should be recalled, it should be removed. It is not based on fact. It was made up on entirely made up numbers, and that document was then also relied on by the regulator to justify their actions. And so, Senator, this is where it's going so catastrophically wrong, that if we can't, as an industry, have faith and confidence in these organisations, and if their reporting can't be relied on to be factual, then what hope is there for us as an industry? It has to be fixed. There must be a heavy burden that falls on your shoulders. We're all pointing to you today to try and bring about a level of, I guess, reasonable change. We're going to have two last questions and comments, and then I've got to wrap it up because the Senator really has to rock and roll. He's got to be opening up a cinema or something in South Australia, so he's got to get on an aeroplane. Stu, can I maybe just get you to quickly throw your question?
Yeah, g'day. Some people know me. I'm Stu Hutchison. I've been involved in sport aviation for quite some time. Had a GA licence for almost 40 years now. It's very dear to my heart. I've got more of an observation from my experience rather than a question, but there will be a bit of question at the end. There's thousands of hours of experience, age experience in this room, hundreds of thousands of hours flown probably. Yet it strikes me that the average age of the people in this room are, well north of 50 probably, including myself. And that in itself, I think, is a sign and a symptom of the problem we have in the industry. And I think we've got a three-pronged problem. CASA, we all love to talk about because we've all experienced problems with CASA. The second one is that the airlines are largely self-sustaining. I think that's a volume thing, it's a viability issue. As they say, if you think aviation is expensive, try having an accident. And the airlines, to a large degree, have got the volume of sales to be able to justify their own business. So they're largely self-sufficient. CASA justifies its size, $800 million a year, 800 people a year and around about 300 million, if I'm not mistaken, to ensure the safety of the travelling public on the airlines. And the small end of town is just a bit of an afterthought, except they create a disproportionate amount of trouble for us at the low end of the market. The other problem is, since the privatisation of airfields, which tend to coincide with CASA becoming the beast that it is today, it's become so much more expensive. Intrinsically, the airport owners are finding alternative ways to make money because the aviation sector, the GA sector, is shrinking. So we end up with people here who've been involved in aviation all of their lives, trying to cling to their passion for aviation, as I am, and I've been building an aeroplane to make that affordable. But the volume isn't there. And then you have an organisation, the third prong in the problem with CASA, that is intrinsically litigious and is worried probably about the average age of the general aviation fleet being somewhere north of 50 as well, with its wiring issues, corrosion issues, fatigue issues, where the replacement cost of a general aviation aeroplane is going to be $600,000 or more. And if you can't generate the volume of flying to justify the capital investment in those aeroplanes, then the small end of town just disappears. And that's what we're seeing. Look at the expansion on this airfield. Sydney, the new Sydney airport's going to squeeze everyone in the airspace here and push a lot of people south. There isn't too many places to move down there, even Camden. Now, Ben's made plenty of videos, we've seen those, of the dilapidated state of this airport, the other airport, which were bought along with Hoxton Park, I think, for about $210 million in 2008, with the intent of selling Hoxton Park to reinvest here. Now, admittedly, they'd spent something like $80 million on dirt to make that viable at Hoxton Park, but huge non-aviation related investment there. That's probably a big money spinner. Very little happening. This is probably one of the better, really old hangars in these two facilities, at these two places. So I'm interested to know not just what we might do about the beast that is CASA, but also how we might, how privatisation at airports has affected the industry and how we might start to open that up to provide airspace, operating space and places for people and their businesses to expand, because in a geography like ours with a population as small as ours, how we can not have a thriving aviation industry is just beyond me. Thanks.
Yes. I think he understands. Okay, Lachlan, very quickly.
Thanks, Ben. I'll stand up here, but actually like to stand another 20 metres over here in the sun. I'm down from Brisbane this morning and I'm under-resourced. Thanks, Senator. Thanks, Ben. My name's Lachlan Gray. I grew up flying here, effectively. I live in Brisbane now. I'm on the staff of the Australian Federation of Air Pilots. We work with, we have a team doing industrial stuff, but I'm in the safety and technical team, so a lot of the CASA staff, air services, airport standards, very much in line with what Ben was saying and others about airports. A quick note, I'm actually helping to bring down the average age below 50. Yep. So, but it's true, yeah, there's a lot of issues which are common, and I'd just like to bullet point a few of those, and a lot of them are in the submissions into the inquiry, which we're all familiar with. The problems with that is, we're all agreeing on the problems, but we're not all agreeing on the solutions. And I don't want to steal anyone's thunder or their hope. I really feel that, and the Senators alluded to it, copying and pasting the whole of the FAA stuff into the Australian regs, it's unachievable. People have been wanting that for decades. It's not happened for a reason. So I I don't mean to burst people's bubbles, but what I want to propose is that people have a think about a third option, and that is, what does outcomes-based regulation mean? We all talk about, regulations being overly legalistic, etc., and they are to a certain degree, but they're prescriptions like do not do this, do not do that. But an outcome is what you're focusing on. It's like coming into land out here. You don't get told do not land outside the cable lines, and then you suddenly see the whole picture. You get told to focus on the end of the runway, use your peripheral vision to land. You're not focusing on that. And let us look up. So we've put together a paper. We want it to be a discussion paper for the industry, but it's actually our supplementary submission into the GA inquiry in the Senate committee. And our pitch is to create an outcomes obligation or CASA. So, and they've done it once. They have actually proved that they can do it. So to give you what is the objective of that regulation, and then you can put the description below it. They've already got the description, so they don't necessarily need to chuck all that out. So this is actually a quicker solution to then bringing in all of the US regs, picking out what we can and can't do. We already know how to work and fly and how to, how things are meant to work in practice. We don't need voice that knows that. And the beauty of this thing is, this idea, it actually will engage the people in CASA that know how to aviate, because the legal people will have to ask the experienced people and say, what is the safety objective here? Because the legal people have written the rules about where you don't go, but it's the people that are in the operations section that will know, well, this is how you achieve it. And so they can write the objective, and that's more suited to everybody here and the industry, and it's going to be more efficient. So it's going to achieve a better safety outcome, but it's going to be so much more time efficient, because rather than CASA people deliberating back and forth of what, they can go, well, here is the objective, it's already clear, and then you can have that consistency. And as we know, one of the most consistent things across the industry is everyone says CASA is very inconsistent. So if we provide them clear objectives, for them and for the industry, we can really move there much quicker. So I just wanted to make that statement that we can have some hope. I know everyone here is very passionate about aviation, otherwise you wouldn't be here. And it's not just about a choice between stuck where we are, banging our heads against the wall and, thumping tables and trying to poke CASA in the chest, or copying and pasting all of the US regs into ours. There is a third option, and we could actually have people overseas going, you know what? I like those Australian regs, we want those. Instead of us going, I want the New Zealand ones or the US regs. So we can do better, it can be simple, it's not that difficult, and I implore you to read what we put there as basically an industry discussion paper.
So thanks, Lachlan. Look, I did see that in your paper, that you weren't recommending the FAA rules. The difficulty is pushing forward with CASA on an alternative. It seems that hasn't happened in the past, and that's the problem. My bill places a deadline on, and would place a legal requirement for something to happen. So here's my offer to you.
And making it work in the system. I've been personally involved with it. I was the vetting manager putting it in place, and the secret to doing it correctly is the transitional regulations that go along with it. Those transitional regulations are the most crucial part, because they take what is there today and you make sure that part survives, and you make sure they move across into the system at the lowest cost possible. If a good regulator is in place today, that's exactly how they can be handling them. The problems they've got today is how they adopt rules out of different systems. Just to put everyone's minds at rest, going down to the new system and adopting a set of rules from the FARs is done correctly, but the one thing you've got to put in place as well, if the FAR is amended, there's going to be a process to amend the Australian part as well. Part 21 today, it is totally down the line with the FAR Part 21. In 2009, there was a major rewrite of the FAA Part 21, and CASA today still has not even made any attempt to pick it up, even though at the bilateral meeting with the FAA about 4 or 5 years ago, the FAA warned a backstop with the United States that recognises some of their manufacturing and that is at risk. It needs to be removed. If CASA doesn't amend Part 21 to realign. CASA stood up at a meeting after their meeting on the final day and made a commitment in 2017 to harmonise Part 21 back to the American system, and just like everything else in CASA today, no action has been taken. Thanks, mate.
Just very brief on that, and I understand what you're saying is it's not that hard, but of course if you've got CASA not willing to do this, and you have none of the expertise, that's why you have to get someone who's independent to come outside. And it sounds like you'll have to make a submission to whichever review, or when the review gets up. So I accept that it could be done by CASA, but if they're not willing to do it, that's why you need someone like the FAA to do a report that says this is possible, and that would command the respect of the Australian Parliament.
I'll give you one situation, Senator. I'll give you one situation. Who do you think? Who do you think got hated the most for the introduction of Part 21?
Probably a good self.
It was the most hate came was internally in CASA.
Okay, well, Senator, the opportunity to have you here today for this event was a great big town hall, a great opportunity for you to meet people from across the aviation industry and to hear firsthand from them. I know you do receive a lot of information directly to your office, but the opportunity for you to be here and actually see their faces, listen to their stories and their views and their opinions is such an important process. So I really do thank you for that. So ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause for Senator. Now, this Senator is right in the middle of an election campaign. I still can't believe we managed to get you on a plane to get up here, to come to Sydney, well and truly outside of your state. You've got to go back, you've got to open up a cinema in South Australia. But it's all about support. You are genuinely supporting the aviation industry, and I think that that's been there every single year that I've been with AOPA, and no doubt it will continue into the next Parliament if you're successful, and I've got a strong inkling you are going to be successful. You're loved down in South Australia, and I dare say you are very well liked and possibly loved throughout the aviation industry as well for the work that you do. So if any of you out there are in agreement with this, and this is where I have to be very careful because the letters come steaming into the AOPA office exactly 10 minutes after I say stuff like this, saying Ben's being very political and he's supporting one party against another. I'll give you all the news. I'll support them all. I will tango with them all and I'll get out and support them all, because I actually believe that a strong, broad coalition of elected representatives is what AOPA needs to get this job done. But if you are in support of Senator Rex Patrick and the work that he does, I encourage you to make a personal decision and go support the guy. Get involved. Have a look at his website, check out what he's up to as an independent down in South Australia. If you've got friends and family and other aviators that you're connected with in South Australia, let them know that the Senator is doing good work on behalf of the aviation industry and is worthwhile taking a look at for this election. And Senator, you have a website, rexpatrick.com.au, that they can go to. It's got all the information about your policies, all the information about the good work that you're doing, and it also includes links that they can make a donation if they choose to do that to support you. And I would encourage you to absolutely get behind the man. I know that he's been rock solid for me at AOPA, for the work, Marjorie, that we've done with Angel Flight and Ken, the work that we've done with Rover and Tony up the back with the Sport Aircraft Association and Lorraine with Bristol. He will always pick up the phone and he will always have time to listen to what we have to advocate for, and that is a rare commodity in politics. So I thank you again so much for giving up your time and supporting us here at AOPA.
Thanks for that, Ben. I'll just go back to my chief of staff over there and just see how much time I think I've got. Whether I've got some time for photographs or not. When he's giving me the thumbs up. I'm actually the puppet here. I've got lots of good people that work behind me that do lots of good look. I really do appreciate. One thing I'll add to what Ben said, don't just pick up the phone and talk to pilots. If you know anyone in South Australia, give them a call, just point them out my way, because most people don't pay much attention to politics. And that's what makes it hard for me. Those that are watching and tend to like what I'm doing, the delivery is 80% of the population don't care much for politics, and I can understand that. Thank you very much for having me out here today. Look, I'm hopefully going to be in the 47th Parliament. I'll stand to my word. I will move a bill as I've described, and I'm happy to help. Again, I've learned a lot as a senator. I'd be happy to help to move little bits at a time, eating an elephant one bite at a time, to get improvements in general aviation.
Thanks, Rex. And that concludes our formal part today. Please stay back for fire.